Okay. Lost about half the room. Okay. Perhaps you're starting to notice the model taking shape. Right? So we connect, we adapt, we practice, we apply, we prepare, and then we have to act. We take steps to once we've done our preparation, now we need to do something more. Now we actually need to have that conversation with a colleague or a member in order to be successful. So what does that look like? I like to look at it in the context of our mental models. And even in that introversion, extroversion activity, maybe we have some mental models about how we show up, what we expect of our coworkers, what we expect of our members. But interestingly enough, our mental model really influences not only how we see ourselves, but how we view the world, how we act in the world, and how we actually shape our environment. How we view situations and ourselves impacts how we act about them. It's not necessarily rocket science, but our mindset impacts our behavior. So when we look at, for example, how do we manage difficult situations, how do we manage challenges, how do we increase our capacity to have a conversation, to have our members secure more services from the organization, right? How do we deal with that? What's our mindset and how do we particularly act? A lot of the research on resilience really looks at these 4 next points. And I think I've already heard people say them today. Is that grit, tenacity, perseverance, self-control. That means when we have that moment of truth, that fear that comes up, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to act differently? Or are we going to go back to our same old behaviors? Being able to change means sometimes we have to have that self-control and that tenacity to try something new. Thoughts or comments or insights about really how we shift our mental model so that we can do what we know we need to do. This is that action piece of it. Conditioning. Tell me more.
You condition yourself to handle a stressful situation over and over again. It would be a little more easy.
Yeah. Yeah. You get used to it, right? I got a C- in speech in college. Hated public speaking. Oh my God, I was so petrified of public speaking. Then I became a waitress at Farrell's. Has anyone been to Farrell's? Heard of Farrell's? Yes. The ice cream parlor, right? Do they still embarrass customers like, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, the San Diego Zoo or whatever city zoo, right? But it wasn't until I became a waitress and had to do those announcements that I was able to get over my fear of public speaking. I had tanked in public speaking in the class itself. It wasn't until I practiced and did it and over and had that conditioning that it got easier, right? Great point, thank you. So when we move forward, we look at continuing the model. And one of the things to consider, looking at this model, we connect, we adapt, we prepare. A lot of that is inside of us. And kind of what we need to do, how we show up, and the relationships we have. Is it inside or outside of us, really? A little bit of both. Because the rest of the model, and this is really where we get the traction for building more engaged members, building our sales, building our resilient organization. Next one, though, is sometimes to risk. I liken this to the duck flies south. When? In the winter. Why do they fly south? It's warmer. The environment has changed, and they need to move. Just like going to online banking, having better, whether it is an app or the quality products and services, if we don't change, if we don't take maybe a risk and try something, we could be in an unhealthy environment, we'll just say that, right? So sometimes we have to take a risk, try something new, whether it be a product or service or a new skill or behavior, It wasn't until we risked that we could actually get something done. So here's a few thoughts for you on risk. Know when it's time to try something new. Have a little bit of courage. Those introverts might need a little bit of courage to step up. The extroverts might need a little self-control to step back, right? Step up, step back, depending on where you are, what your situation is. And also, have a clear vision. Where are you going? You know, this is, where's the organization going and how do we differentiate ourselves? What's our vision? And who was that? I think earlier this morning said, we have to be able to have our brand, communicate that. What are we all about? That's an important part of that risk. Is what if that doesn't resonate with your members, right? So there's a little bit about risk there. And the last piece of the puzzle, as you're starting to see now, we're getting our life preserver, right? This is what helps us stay afloat. We need each piece of this puzzle. The last piece of the puzzle is now to assess. Assess the situation. The scientist at SeaWorld told me that if a duck doesn't have access to clean or healthy water, that become model, they are not waterproof anymore. Sometimes we need to assess the situation for ourselves, for our members, for our organization. How's the weather? What do we need to do differently? Sometimes it's simply to get into a better situation. If it's us personally or members, or if they're having a hard time, if I was your member and my mortgage was in default, how would you treat me? What kind of conversation would you have with me? Is that uncomfortable to have that conversation? Yeah. Who's it uncomfortable for? Everyone, right? It's not a fun conversation. But sometimes it's being able to assess the situation and say, we can help. We want to help. Here's what we can do together. What's your role as a member? What's our role as an organization, right? How do we get there? So sometimes it's being able to check that climate, assess the situation, take care of yourself also. Because if you can't have that conversation, if you're not in the right mindset to have that conversation, the member is not going to be served well. Or your coworkers might not be served well. It's not just about the member, it's about each other as well. So hopefully you've been able to kind of connect with some of your colleagues in these activities. So it takes the whole picture to stay afloat. I brought this little duck over here, the big duck, put a little floaty on him. Because we need to do something. I like to use the life preserver to represent resilience is not automatic. We need to take action. We need to do something in order to stay afloat. So in our last few minutes together, I want you to, with your e-partner again, have this conversation. What actions, kind of what insights do you have from our time together this morning? What actions might you take to embrace your role in this organization to create more resilient partnerships, more resilient organization, similar to what we had talked about before? And how might your mindset actually need to change in order to fulfill your role? Talk with your e-partner about those two questions.